So a lot of what the Santo Daime is originates in Africa, actually. A lot of what's going on in Brazil, syncretic religions, which Santo Daime is one of them, originate in Africa. So
Daime isn't about like, oh, I take this and my life is just going to get so much easier or I'll have all the answers. It's about like how you persevere in some ways, how you persevere even when even when it's not easy, how you hold yourself.
Welcome back to Black Condor Talks. Adorable. Thank you for joining us. Black Condor Talks offers us an opportunity to learn about indigenous and ancient wisdom and open up conversations about plant medicine for the Black and Brown community. And today we have a very, very special opportunity for us to connect with Danielle and Tonai, who are part of Black Condor, and really excited to have them share with us the beautiful, rich, and lush teachings of the Santo Daime. And so we're going to be getting into that right now. I just want to say, welcome, Danielle,
Hi, thank you.
and welcome, Tanai. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
hello, adorable. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. We're going to go ahead and activate or drop in with you both and talk about your connections and your thoughts and your views about this work. So let's start off by talking about the master plant that we're naming within this conversation. We are specifically talking about a form of ayahuasca called Santo Daime. For Santo Daime, it is a very specific type of tradition. I'd love to just kind of lay it down and ask you what drew you to joining Santo Daime work over being in maybe like what we would call an ayahuasca ceremonial circle.
So what drew me to the Santo Daime was that at first I started drinking ayahuasca with some shamans from the Amazon, from the Shipibo tribe that traveled to where I was living at the time in Hawaii, and that were doing works. They were basically on a tour doing works in different places. One of my friends connected me to this community and to this ceremony. This was about 23 years ago, roughly. And so I learned about that. I had already been interested in plant medicine and in consciousness and multi-dimensions and awareness and all those things even before that. So it seemed pretty natural that like once I discovered ayahuasca, I was like, wow, I'm definitely going there, and I want to learn from this medicine. So went to my first ceremony, and then it was amazing. It was the first time I ever felt a heart opening. That feeling in the heart of just it bursting open and feeling all that love. It's the first time I've ever felt that to that level. And so I just knew, like, since my first ceremony that I was going to be working with this medicine for the rest of my life. And so some years go by. I attend a few more ceremonies, but a lot less frequently because to have access to the medicine at that time for me was very slim. There was only like, when I'm able to or when I find a ceremony, there's like years in between and stuff to have access to the medicine. And so once I discovered the Sanso Daime, which I discovered that through reading about ayahuasca, and then like the books that I was reading was mentioning the Sanso Daime, I became really interested in that and really wanted to explore what that was, especially since like the founder of the Sanso Daime is a Black man. And I found that intriguing, living in the middle of the Amazon rainforest and leading groups of people through this medicine work. And so it wasn't until like 16 years ago, once I joined the Sanso Daime, did my first work. And some of the things that I noticed that were way different from the Santo Daime work versus the work with ayahuasca was that the ayahuasca ceremonies were more so done in the dark and were mostly like completely being led by the shaman or the ceremonialist that was conducting the whole ceremony and singing all the songs. And so from then I could tell it was an entirely different practice where like the Santo Daime requires more presence from the participants as far as in the way of like singing and participating in that way and having firmness and being able to like be fully present and cognizant during the experience, while you're going through all the different levels and stages of the Santo Daime. And the lights are on and we're looking around. We're not necessarily looking at people, but like, it's just a different practice. But I think that what really drew me was not only that the founder was a Black man, but also the accessibility of the medicine grew a lot for me because I discovered that there were Santo Daime communities right where I lived at in Oregon. It's legal at the Supreme Court level in Oregon. Ever since like I think sometime around like 2009 or 2010, around that time, it became legal. And so there's many different Santo Daime communities in Oregon, and there's a lot of accessibility to the medicine and to work with the Santo Daime. And so the amount of times that I was able to work with this medicine increased, and so that was another factor in my moving into this path and my exploration into this path. And so yeah, that's the short answer.
I actually came into this particular type of like healing work or medicine work through Daime. I didn't come from like a traditional ayahuasca ceremonies. I had been having a really hard year and was looking for some like support and like an expansion to help just go like heal some things in myself and it's interesting to like when I first said to somebody like this is what I'm looking for to the point where I went to my first ceremony was very like short amount of time, about a week or something. So it feels like very much the path was meant to be open for me. I think for me, having experienced both kinds of ceremonies, I like to say like for me, ayahuasca felt a little bit more like choose your own adventure. It's very open and wide, and you have, you part of the way that you prepare for a ceremony is you're like picking care in your body, you're taking certain kinds of like rest or like meditation so that you can help craft what you're part of what you're searching for. And in the Santo Daime there's a little bit more of a container, so you are working together. It's much more of a like a collective practice to create what we call a current. And that's meant to be about healing and faith and support for one another and whatnot. And so it's almost like, I guess in a comparison, like if you were, there's some boundaries basically that help me feel like a little more grounded in the practice. And then definitely, my first Santo Daime ceremony, I just had this amazing like unfolding, and just the purity of love and connection was really powerful. Connection like to our creator, and also like connection to, just knowing that we're all in sort of in it together. And that really spoke to me in a way that felt like it was calling my heart. I think, yeah, that's probably the main things that drew me to it. I think ayahuasca is really important for people to have that journey to do this. And I like to say there's like more than one way up the mountain, more than one way to heal ourselves. It's just the one that calls to you.
Thank you both so much for sharing that. I think it's quite fascinating the difference between working with ayahuasca versus Santo Daime. I do want to name that they are relatively pretty much the same substance. They are kind of different. Maybe we can kind of actually next go to if you maybe both can, anything you both want to say about the difference between ayahuasca and Santo Daime as it relates to the actual sacraments, and then maybe also share, you know, how much experience you have like working with the Santo Daime over the years, and what's kept you coming back to doing this work after all this time.
Um, what's kept me coming back to doing this work for many years, because I've been in this for about 16 years, was that at the beginning of it, I didn't really know what was going to be happening, like, in the years to come. But what I've experienced is a lot of healing, a lot of self-discovery, a lot of recognizing things in myself that I didn't even know about, and it's not all good and it's not all bad, but it's just like things that are real that because when you take the medicine and she shows you all these things about yourself or about your family or about your lineage or about your psychology, then that's an opportunity for you to explore those things further and heal those things. And so we get shown a lot, but then we also have the opportunity in our daily lives to actually perform the healing, to actually do the healing with ourselves. And it's more so less about the experience with the medicine and more about what we do with it. And we also have we can have a really profound experience, but if we don't do anything with it, it could just fall away, just like, water falls away, falls through the hand, like, and we don't actually catch it. And so integration is really important in these medicine circles, in these works that we do. Integration is very important. Otherwise, we can learn the same thing over and over again. And that's what I noticed, throughout the many years. Time is important, but time is less important than application and self-practice. And that's what I would say to my past self who's just getting started, is that more studying, more self-reflection, more self-understanding. That's the gift that we receive from the medicine, at the very least, is just seeing ourselves through the lens of this plant medicine being, this plant medicine spirit that we allow inside of us, inside our bodies. And so that's what I would say to that.
I think I really want to uplift what Tonai was saying about like it's not just what you hear or understand from the ceremony, but how you apply it in your life. I think, I've gone to ayahuasca ceremonies, had really deep, profound healing, but it was important, it, regardless of what ceremony you're going to, like how you're going to apply it. One thing I suppose about Santo Daime, because it does have the rules and a little bit of the, like you said, this a certain kind of uniformity. There are tenets, and you're hopefully carrying those tenets or building them into other parts in your life. The firmness, so being able to stay in your place to move through things like charity for one another, and I think that is definitely available in any kind of ceremony. It's just more like sometimes talked about a little more explicitly in the Santo Daime space. We often say like the work is between the works. So whatever you get from your ceremony, it's like the real test, the real challenge is like, yeah, how you integrate that and make it happen in your life. And that is an important part of the way that it unfolds, If you're getting like amazing gift of like feeling pure love or having like a release of something, or showing you maybe something that you need to let go of in your life, it's up to you when you're outside and in your everyday life to then continue to carry that forward, how you show love to other people, how you let go of whatever the habit is that you need to change or continue to work on. Some things end up, I definitely feel like there are messages I get that I'm like, I'm still working on that. It's a longer process. So yeah, that is such an important part of like building, I think, from any kind of healing ceremonies.
Absolutely. And I think both of you are highlighting the wisdom of your own kind of inner being to connect with plant wisdom and what happens when the synergy of you and the synergy of this master plant come together and the transformation that's possible. I think it's really beautiful. It sounds like you're in a relationship with this plant and with this path that feels really mutual, that feels really beneficial. And also, I'd love to hear maybe like if there's any challenges you've had and being able to navigate Santo Daime personally, like if there's been anything that has been challenging and by you were able to kind of get leverage the songs and the medicine to kind of pull you through. Like how has there been a moment in life where the medicine's been able to pull you through something that maybe it was really challenging to do by yourself? I'm very curious how this ally has shown up in your life.
Yeah, there's been, it can be really challenging at times, especially when there's like a difficulty happening in your life. Like I've been through life difficulties. I've been homeless before. I've struggled a lot. I've been through a lot of struggles. There's even been times where like I needed to like, not drink Daime at certain times in order to just get things in my life straight to a level where like, I can open myself up again. And so it's not necessarily about always going to work, and always drinking Daime and always, sometimes the medicine will call you to like bring your attention to another place in your life or to somewhere else that needs healing. And just because you're not at a ceremony doesn't mean that the medicine's not working with you, because once you take it in and you take it into your life, it's always working with you. And so just like Danielle said that, that's I have those same sayings. Like we at our church have those same sayings that like the work is really in between the works. And sometimes that in between could last a long time. Sometimes it's shorter. Nevertheless, these are the most important times when something comes up, when challenges come up in life. Those are the times that we are really called to like take what we learned inside of the ceremonies and inside of the works and bring it into our life. And sometimes, if we don't do that, or if we are having challenges doing that, then we have the opportunity to learn, the same lessons again, until we get through it. And so
Mm.
it's not like a straight path forward. It's not a straight path through. We are attempting to walk the straight path forward. However, life can be complex, and we might get stuck at certain places, but we just keep moving forward. It's kind of like one of our padrinos from the Ashland Church, Jonathan says, is that this is not a sheep path. This is a goat path. And so when you think of how goats move, goats are climbing mountains. Goats are like on the side of like really steep hills, like walking these really narrow paths through, trekking through these very rough terrain areas, and just, places that you wouldn't even think that you can walk. And they're getting through it. So it's kind of like that. That's a good metaphor, I would say, for this path is that
I love
um
that, by the way. I love that because that the whole it's not we're not sheep. I think that's going to come later in our conversation when we kind of talk about what it means to be a part of an organization. But this what you're naming in the goat thing is like there's a part of you having to kind of I feel like goats are also like they're doing their thing. They're in their own impetus. They're together, but they're doing their own thing. They're climbing that mountaintop. That's such a brilliant analogy tonight.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, and it feels that way too, like, and that's how I would explain like this path. It's, it could be a jagged and narrow road sometimes. And with also it could be the exact opposite of that. Sometimes it could be open and free sometimes. So like it just depends on where you're at, knowing what your place is and where your place is at and what your work is, I think is the important thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. I have sort of like three thoughts that I want to make sure I touch on in this. So one is like I certainly have had experience. This happened to me more earlier in medicine, where I wasn't approaching enough with humility, and the medicine would like hold itself back from me and like say like, no, you're this is not the way you come, right? And I had to sort of shift the way I was doing things. Because I think in many ways it's used to being like, well, I'm in control. I want to like, I'm going to dictate the kind of experience I want to have. And that's not really how it works. So I think that is an important lesson. That's also about like humbleness of how you approach life. And then one other thing I think, I don't remember exactly what you said, but I know I really want to highlight this is, people who grow up in like what we understand traditionally as the West, we often have this whether we intend to or not, like this very consumptive way of approaching the world, right? Like I paid for the ceremony or I did whatever, and like I'm supposed to have this thing and all the work will just happen for me. And that almost like you're ticking a box, right? Like I went to the work and I saw this thing and or I received this message and like that's done. And this is not a like consumerism or consumptive way of being. And I'm sure there are in any practice. I think you hear sometimes like um to be like really real about it, like particularly like white people who go to like ayahuasca ceremonies speak in this way that feels very much like in line with that. I feel like there was like a period in the teens where like the tech bros were so into ayahuasca ceremonies, right? And that is like, I cannot speak to what they got from that because everybody's experience is their own. And at the same time, like that is, I think, from my training, from my understanding, like not the way that we need to be approaching medicine, right? Like certainly you're coming for what you need. You've been called by whatever modality that you're entering, but there is a way of like releasing, like it's not just like I did the experience. It's not just like I bought the thing or I, like in the Santo Daime, like we wear uniforms when it's called a farda, and you have a star when you're a member, and you don't just like go to a ceremony and then you like, oh, I get my star. Like there's a way that you're building a relationship, because it isn't meant to just be like things that we take. And then the last thing I wanted to sort of say was like, so I, as a caregiver for a long time for somebody in my family who was suffering from a degenerative disease. And so, in so many ways, like the medicine was really helpful for me to be able to hold that space for them to deal with things like progressing over time and over their course, and to meet the situation with more presence and love rather than just sort of sitting in my own pain about the situation or frustration about like how things were going. And I think that's part of why perhaps like this modality called to me in a way, right? Because it was reflecting to me like things that I needed to really be implementing in my own life, structure I needed to have like for myself and carry through, regardless of whether I was, able to go to a ceremony every month or or if it had been a long time or something. Sort of like what Tonai is saying, like, yeah, when you make the relationship with the sacrament, like it's a sacred tea that you're consuming and or that you're imbibing really. And so you need to you're making a relationship. And there are ways that like it's almost like I think for me it felt like I was almost like a seed. You're planted and you're waiting, like, when am I going to bloom? When am I, how am I going to get through this? And it was a lot of important lessons over that time of like letting things take their time, that humility to like grow and blossom. And I can see that now, lessons that it's ongoing, but like lessons that I feel like I received from the Daime, like earlier that it felt like, oh, I'm making this change in my life, but maybe I'm the only one that can see it. I think now they're more visible.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. Just wanted to take a little break here to let you know that Roots of Renewal is happening July 31st through August 2nd, 2026, in the Bay Area, California. If you are interested in meeting the medicine and sitting within an all Black space to be able to have an opportunity to do deep healing work in Black community in a sacred space that's held with divine intention. Please feel free to come to one of our info sessions where you can learn about Black Condor, learn about plant medicine, and learn about the work that we're doing in the world. We hope that you feel called.
They're more grounded for me, and I that in part is because of the relationship built with the Daime.
Mm, hmm. Wow. I think you brought up a lot of good points, and thank you for sharing your own personal life, like weaving that in there as well. And talking about something that, we don't typically talk about, we don't talk enough about, which is kind of the consumptive nature of working with the plants, that can be an issue. And you also named just the way in which this brew, this tea, is able to transform lives in a way that is so it's so beautiful and it's so organic. And it is an organic medicine that we are connecting and working with. I know in a past Black Condors talk, we've talked about the medicine before. What, like when we think about like Santo Daime itself, the brew, the tea that we're connecting with, how is it different than ayahuasca? Well, what is the difference between Santo Daime and ayahuasca?
What I know about the difference between Santo Daime and ayahuasca is that first of all, it's made differently. I haven't been in on any ayahuasca making ceremonies or anything like that, but I've read about them. But I have been to a fechio, which is a Santo Daime ceremony. That's where we make the medicine. We make the medicine in these ceremonies called fechios. Had the benefit of going to Hawaii, where there's also a church there, and they hold fechios there. And a fechio is a specific type of work that where the Santo Daime is created, and because the jagubi vine and the hyena leaf grows there because it's a tropical environment, so it grows there naturally. However, the plants there, the the jagubi vine, they're much younger than the ones in Brazil, and so there's a specific type of quality to that medicine there. And the way that the facials work is that it's very organized. The the women do specific work with the hyena leaf. They deal with the leaves, they collect the leaves, clean them, prepare the leaves for being cooked, and all the men. And plus, we're staying in our own separate spaces through the whole time as well, the men and the women, just like the Santo Daime ceremonies are structured. And what the men do is deal with the jagubi vine. What we do with the vine is we collect the vines. We are in unison. First of all, we're drinking the medicine throughout the whole time. So it's like one big ceremony for like a week long. We take the vines and we beat the vines with these mallets. And but we're beating them in unison and we're singing hymns at the same time. So as we're beating them, everybody's just hitting the vine at the same time, and we're just turning the vine and hitting the vine, and we're singing. And it sounds really beautiful when we're doing it. We're pulverizing it down to like little pieces, and then once that happens, everything is collected and it goes into one big pot and gets cooked and brewed and until it becomes the ayahuasca brew or the Santo Daime brew. That's a little bit about the process of how the daime is made. From my understanding, as far as what I know about ayahuasca, each individual shaman or tribe make up their own medicine, and then sometimes they will have different herbs mixed in with the Psychotria viridis and the hyena leaf. I think that varies from practitioner to practitioner, like what they have in the mix.
Yeah. I've made ayahuasca a couple of times. Made it in the jungle with the teachers that I was working with at the time. You're right that potentially there's there's the different recipes. People got different recipes they pass along. I've seen, when I've been able to have the ability to work with making the ayahuasca, it has been truly phenomenal. Like you are being invited to have really clean and pure thoughts. But sing I know that with Santo Daime, like you're singing hymns the whole time. And with my experience, I feel like with ayahuasca, it actually follows and tracks what we talked about earlier, which is like the guidelines and the protocol with Santo Daime in the ceremony. It's like the medicine itself follows the same track as the Santo Daime work in the circle, and the making of the ayahuasca follows the same track. And that when we're working with ayahuasca, it is like a tributary of just so many different traditions, different tribes. Like it opens up into a whole different kind of ecosystem of ayahuasca. Would y'all consider that? Would you consider ayahuasca to be kind of the top, and then the Santo Daime to be a tributary or like a interpretation of ayahuasca as all the other traditions? I'm curious because I think for me it's like we could go Santo Daime this, ayahuasca that, but I'm wondering if ayahuasca in her raw form, which is the jagubi and the chacruna leaves, and then there's all these different interpretations.
Well, one thing that I'll say about that is I know that like, the ayahuasca traditions go back uh, a really long time ago. I'm not sure like how long ago, but
About 3,000 years, three to like 5,000 years.
yeah, so like that's a lot of time of practice and the gaining of plant knowledge and stuff. So as far as the modern era, the Santo Daime as a church as a whole is one of the oldest church religions or one of the oldest ayahuasca religions in modern times. However, these traditions of ayahuasca go back generations, and so I don't know how to like measure or compare any of this. It's just
I think you just did. That was perfect. And that was a great way of putting it. Ayahuasca, I'm sorry, Santo Daime is an ayahuasca religion. I think that's kind of like a key thing to name that I think is important to distinguish. So I do want to shift gears then, and then you were naming your resonance with this, and Danielle, please join in on this conversation too. But you were naming tonight your resonance with this because there's a connection to a black man, a famous black man at this moment, who is the founder, happens to be the founder of the Santo Daime Church, which brings in Black history and the Black identity and our connection to ayahuasca, which is very fascinating. I'd love for you both to kind of tag team the activation of Santo Daime and the history of it, the Black history of it. I'd love for you both to kind of speak to that.
well, I just want to say first off that like Mestre Irineu Serra is the founder of the Santo Daime. He's a 7 foot tall black man from the Amazonian rainforest. He was born in 1892, about 4 years after slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888 on the 13th of May. That's very significant because his parents were enslaved. And so he's like the first generation of non-enslaved ancestry that we have today. And so, for that to be a fact and for him to come with this medicine and this path and having received this from the Virgin of Conception as he was experiencing her presence, I think it's pretty amazing, and it's still a lot of a mystery to me that I'm still in deep study with. And so that's a huge piece of Black history that relates to Brazil that I think that could use more emphasis in this path, especially, the white dominant communities of this Santo Daime path, just realizing the weight and the gravity of, Mestre Irineu's parents were enslaved and he was born, a few years after slavery was abolished in Brazil, I think is very significant.
Yeah. And he was a rubber tapper at a time when that was happening a lot in Brazil. And it's not a, it's hard work and it's very remote work in the forest. So that's from my understanding, like how he encountered medicine and sat with tribes and then, yeah, receive this messaging. How can I help heal people? How can I, what, how do I bring something basically better to the world? And this is the message, the Daime, bring the Daime to others. And Daime means give me, right? So, and it's not just like, again, like we're taking, but like, give me love, give me healing, give me a way to support others is really an important piece of this. And a lot of our traditions and the practice that we're doing, it's coming out of that kind of his background and this history. So, we sing, it's an active participation ceremony. And, we do have, people do have books now. And I think especially here, you would see books, but originally you would have been, learning songs by ear. So there's a certain amount of like repetition in the songs a lot to help with that. There's a way that you can even argue like the fardas, like I was saying, the uniforms that we have. Like if you imagine that you're somewhere kind of you're not in an urban setting, particularly you're not in like these places. So there's something to be said about like thinking about the way that how you prepare yourself, right? Like what you're putting on and that sort of reinforcing this idea, some of the ideas that we have, like about being in light, about being together. We have some works that are called dancing works, and the work, it's not just like when you say a dancing work, I think people think like, oh, you can just do what you feel, and that's not actually what you're doing. It's a very organized movement, and it sort of like makes this almost like vortex, like you're sort of like this, and all of that, like these energy of like helping to create the focus. I think even like the idea, I said we have these tenets, firmness and discipline, or sort of interchangeable, I suppose, like are a key tenet. But if you're coming from a place where your work is incredibly challenging, where life is not necessarily easy, having that discipline, that firmness, the ability to carry through, like, even though things are hard, I'm going to be charitable. Even though things are hard, I'm going to show up with love. I'm going to be honest and true. They're all coming from this same kind of like orientation. Daime isn't about like, oh, I take this and my life is just going to get so much easier or I'll have all the answers. It's about like how you persevere in some ways, how you persevere even when even when it's not easy, how you hold yourself, even when it's challenging. I think, there are many songs actually about that, like holding yourself in firmness, holding yourself in discipline, stay in your place, like keep carrying we're working together and we're carrying this together is often a theme of some of the songs, which are basically like prayers. I think when you are asking about the medicine making, one of the things I think about is like in both spaces, in a way, you're bringing a prayer into the work, right? Adding that energy into the tea. They're just slightly different prayers, right? And that helps create like a slightly different space. And like I said, I think it's just about like what works well for different people. I know folks who are like, I really need the container. It helps me like keep myself focused, like really get the most out of it. And I think there are other people who probably very much bristle under like the rules, because there are quite a few, right? Like and even like this other thing you said about like gender, like so in our works, the gender, you're separated by gender normally, and so women are on one side and men are on the other. And I think for many people that can be a way of, I can only speak for the women's side, like that can be a wonderful comfort, like to be with your sisters, to have it's sort of a different kind of energetic space. But I can also see how that might be challenging for different people, where it doesn't necessarily speak to their identity, or like an intermingling might be useful in other ways.
Speaking of identity, I think you in a past conversation, Danielle, and then just now tonight, you brought this up that people may or may not be aware of when it comes to plant medicine space. Plant medicine space is pretty much, I mean, it mirrors like our society. It can mirror reality in that there is a history of white people or whiteness coming and colonizing and kind of taking over spaces. That is a history. I think people might think when it comes to spiritual spaces, working with ayahuasca, working with Santo Daime, that wouldn't, and then it being something that's originating from a place like Brazil, that wouldn't be the issue. Although I mean, like literally, you were naming the founder, Mestre Irineo, his parents were slaves. So that like there is this complexity, this being a healing path born out of the necessity for healing, but also the complexities around race and the intersections of white supremacy that then also are kind of in essence still kind of playing out or in different forms. And so I have so many threads I want to talk about. I definitely want to talk about mediumship and orishas and I know Danielle, when we were in a Santo Daime song circle learning about the songs, you were naming, yeah, what sounds like basically the colonization of the Santo Daime is what I'm hearing. And that I don't think people who are brand new and hearing about this for the first time understand, the ecosystem of Santo Daime, the extent to which kind of Blackness is not prevalent. I know you both named your origin stories, but I also know tonight you were naming like Santo Daime hashtag so white in Oregon, right? Like, I mean, just that, us as people of color, us as Black people within medicine space, this is something we are connected, literally connected, literally activated by a Black person and upheld by Black people. But that when you then go to actually go and sit and do the Santo Daime work, or you go to, we'll keep it in that lane. Because I could name, spoiler alert, ayahuasca spaces are very white. But when it comes to this tradition that's actually coming from Black history, that is also mirrored there, right? So I'm very curious if we can kind of maybe pull in more information about Santo Daime as it relates to the Orishas, which is undisputedly a Black thing. That the Orishas originate from Ifa, from Candomblé, from Africa, was brought over by way of slavery to Brazil. The Candomblé tradition specifically, that would be the Orishas that would be influencing the Santo Daime. So I love maybe Danielle, if you could unravel this big box of words that I've given you to kind of unpack in any way that feels good for you.
Just want to name that, right? So like this is my understanding of how certain practices got to Brazil. So there's a practice called, I don't think I say this right, but kalundu, right? And this is like the origin of candomblé, but it's also this other system called kabula. And kabula is the like precursor sort of to umbanda. It's the practice that then you could argue that Zilo Fernandino G. Moraes, I'm not saying the name right. This is terrible. You would think I wasn't an Umbandista. But is then like, I'm starting my church with his caboclo. There's a little challenge there, I would say, because that's like not everybody necessarily understands that as the history. But what in the spaces that I have seen, definitely like in certain like spaces like in Brazilian, like if you're like on social media around Umbanda and this, there are a lot of people who are pushing back, like this is actually a Black practice. We need to like there's a certain vein that's like less syncretism, more focus on like these other origins. So it can be a little, that is all to say this, it's a little complicated. There's also some pieces, I think, of the practice that are more specific to Umbanda that are not mirrored in other practices. Like, for example, you have issue, or like sometimes that's seen as like Papa Legba or Elegba. and issue, sometimes seen as the two same or like two sides of a coin almost. And that is like the Orisha, the crossroads. And then that's issue is definitely an entity of the crossroads, but it's not seen in the same way in most of Umbanda. So
Hmm.
all
Hmm.
of this is to say it could be more complicated.
You know?
Or I can try to like keep it a little more simple. So
Yeah. Well, I
yeah.
mean,
But
you were naming though that at a certain point that one that though that the Santo Daime was separate from the Umbanda, and
yeah.
then there was there was a shift. And I
Mhm.
mean, there is distinct Umbanda traditions that don't work with ayahuasca, that are doing their
Yes.
own thing,
Most of
and
them do.
most of them.
Most of them do.
So
Yeah.
then what do you feel like was the thing that made or like maybe that's not the question, but then so then there was something where people were introducing the Umbanda into Santo Daime, and what did that then begin to take on and look like when those things came together?
Um, so okay. This is like a like more recent, I guess, in the history like space, and it comes from an individual called Bashinya. She was an Umbandista. She had a caboclo, which I feel like we need to explain a little bit, but called Tupinamba, and he gave her a message about going to Santo Daime to receive sacrament. And in most of Umbanda, like I said, most Umbandistas aren't imbibing anything. There are definitely lines where it's like at a minimum it would be frowned upon, like even outside of like their ceremonies, just like this isn't how we practice our healing. So it's, a clear, firm message that she receives, and I believe, if I remember the story correctly, at first she's like, I don't know about this, and it's like, no, it's a very clear message, right? And then receives this, and then there's this sort of place where these two practices intertwine. I think in just thinking about it and backing up a little bit, there's some places where there's overlap, like the Orisha, and part of that is because, outside of the continent of Africa, the largest like population of Black people is in Brazil. If you look at the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, something like basically about half of the people came to Brazil. It's natural that these people would bring their traditions, that we would, be bringing these practices, and because of the violence and oppression of slavery, that they would need to modify and change, and the blending, right? Because there's many people who came,
Hmm.
obviously, and so you're getting different flavors sort of mixing together, right? And you see that in all of these traditions. You can see that in Umbanda, you can see that in Candomblé, you can see that in, even if you looked at like across the spectrum of ADRs, right? You can see it in Santeria, you can see it in 21 divisions. There's like the ways that things are very similar, Udun even, right? And the ways that each practice has its own specific way of being. I think in terms of Santo Daime, it can be how do I say this? So in some ways, it's like it's often spoken about as like a form of like folk Catholicism. There is strong veins of like the Virgin Mother, Jesus. There's certain saints that are uplifted, but then there are other pieces with Orisha that are brought in, certainly like Ja,
Oh,
Shango, and
sure.
as these, and in particular, I think as if you look at the points where the Umbanda and Santo Daime start to come together more, that become, there are definitely books, Hanarios, right? So it's like a set of hymns that are sung for a specific ceremony, where there might be a lot more of that brought in. I think in particular, I know like we all have been singing Hanarios of Bashinya, and feel like I have some, so that it makes sense that they would be like really uplifting in that place. And I think in some ways, like it's not completely accurate to call Santo Daime simply like some kind of folk Catholicism, because we know that like people came from traditions where you had to hide
Mhm.
your practice um, for threat to of violence, for threat to your life. So it's not. I don't know that I'm like the perfect. I'm not a great expert to particularly like speak to that in depth. I think, but even I think that's there, and it is important to acknowledge. So I feel like I'm pinging
Yeah.
all over. But like, so for example, like Oshala is often like syncretized with Jesus. And it's this idea of like the Christ consciousness, this way of like bringing yourself up, of like the way that you carry yourself. There's less focus on like this idea of like being sacrificed for everyone's sins. Although that's there to an extent, but it's much more on like healing and love, being redeemed, right? There's a purity of love with like the Virgin Mother, like these sort of, in some ways, like larger archetypes that we see that are often, again, like in different forms, some way, but in other practices that are really kind of the vein there.
Thank you for
I hope that.
sharing that. Like we've been at Black Condor, thanks to Tonai, we've been hosting song circles dedicated to learning Santo Daime hymns. So we've been doing this for almost like 6 months now. And so I myself, I haven't even gone to like an official, maybe pure Santo Daime ceremony. We do it when we do our summer ceremony coming up. It's Santo Daime definitely influenced heavily. Like it's held by people who do pure Santo Daime works. But even then, there's aspects of it that lend itself to kind of opening up to ayahuasca type of traditions mixed within. But what I will say is like in being able to experience these song circles, the songs themselves are just mind blowing as far as like being a medicine within themselves, so medicinal.
Mhm.
And I grew up as a Christian. And so when I see these songs, the thing that I find to be quite fascinating is, I mean, you naming the origin that you've named, I don't feel a sense of I don't feel like I'm seeing something that brings me into kind of the old kind of Christian belief system when I'm singing the hymns, because the hymns aren't it's not like I'm singing about being a sinner, or like I'm singing about, like, the songs don't do that. The songs are very much like pouring light into my life and me asking for support and me remembering who I am and me sitting in the garden, and like all of the songs aren't pointing me towards damnation. So there's
Right.
there's like it's different. It's like, so I could see the elements of the Judeo-Christian kind of beliefs in the Catholicism. But for me, it's like almost like Maestri Ireneo, like he almost kind of like broke something. He like broke a cycle, or he redefined and reinterpreted our relationship with the divine, and then we have plant medicine mixed in there. It's like this religion, it isn't like copy and paste Christianity and add ayahuasca, right?
Right. No, it's definitely not. I think so much of this is about like, yeah, how you carry certain tenets forward, and like almost like it's your soul's evolution, right? And I think certainly in Umbanda there's this Cardist spiritualism, Alan Kardec being this sort of famous like 19th century French spiritist, this idea of mediumship. That though, I think you can see a little bit even in like more traditional Santo Daime, not mixed with the Umbanda, that line being there, this idea of like the evolution of our souls, the connection, the support of each other's souls. So it's much more, it's not focused on like, you're so bad. Or like the things you do are so like, like there is definitely an element of like, okay, brothers and sisters, like let's move ourselves higher. So like, don't don't get stuck in the thing. Don't do things you know are wrong, but not in a it's much less chastising, I guess. Like it's much more loving. We we move it together. And I think, you know, if you think about especially like as the church is first being formed, that makes a lot of sense, right? Your survival your is very interdependent, right? We're working together spiritually, but also working together in many ways outside of that to support and uplift one another. And so we want to like reinforce that. There's also a lot of focus on like more positive things like love, the beauty of the world, the beauty of God's creation or the create, you know, however you understand the creator, and that we're like blessed in these practices. There's often also a lot of focus on like service to one another, right? So, which again, like if you're if you're in certain spaces where you're where your success and your survival is very interdependent, then yeah, we want to be of service to one another. That's how we make it work, and that being reinforced is a critical component. So I don't know that I hear. I'm trying to think if there's any songs specifically that talk about like Christ consciousness, but I feel like when you're discussing that, when you like sort of look at the interpretate like the translations, you can see this sort of being it's a way of understanding what the meaning is in a lot of the songs. It's
Mm,
this idea of that elevation.
absolutely. And tonight, what are your thoughts?
Thing about the Black influence on the Santo Daime, we work with the Orisha energy. You know, the Orishas are specifically deities that come from Black lineages. A lot of the connection with that is connected to like Candomblé and Umbanda and Ifa and all the traditions that originate in from Africa. All of that is within the Santo Daime because, you know, in a lot of the hymns that we sing also call on the Orishas, also call on Yemaja, you know, Ogun, Berama, like a lot of these beings, there's threads running through the African religions into the Santo Daime. So a lot of what the Santo Daime is originates in Africa, actually. A lot of what's going on in Brazil, syncretic religions, which Santo Daime is one of them, originate in Africa. And that's an interesting thread to look at, to just see a lot of the similarities of the beliefs and the, you know, the understanding and the consciousness of, you know, mediumship and working with this medicine. So even though, like, you know, in North America, the Santo Daime is primarily, you know, there's a lot of white-bodied people in the Santo Daime in North America today, but a lot of the concepts and the songs and the beings and you know the archetypal manifestations that are in the Santo Daime can mostly be traced back to African. So it's very Black. There's a lot of Blackness within the deeper roots of this tradition. And so it's my personal goal or prayer that, you know, that us Black people in North America find this and embrace it. And because it's, you know, it's for us, you know, as well. So actually, and I also wanted to say too that there's a council in North America of Black Diamistas that is called DCAUS, which DCAUS is like DCAUS, which stands for the Descendants of Captured and Enslaved Africans in the United States. That's just a group of Black folks who've been in the Santo Daime for a very long time. And we come together, create this continuation in this thread of like sharing Black history within our community and just keeping this understanding of the Blackness of the Santo Daime alive and well. There's so much I can share actually, you know. There's this woman who was a madrina in the Santo Daime. She's no longer a part of the Santo Daime, but when she was, she led her own church. In her church, she received this special work, which was It was called the the charity work for the slaves, and it specifically focused on the transatlantic slave trade. And so, what it consisted of was we sang mystery hymns, we sang Southern spirituals, the same, a lot of the same songs that were sung in the South and in the early part of the last century, songs that are in our ancestry. We also sung hymns or pontos to the pretos velhos, and the pretos velhos, what that means is the old black ones. And so those are evolved souls of black folks and ancestors from that suffered during slavery, and they evolve and they become our guides and our healers on this path, and our so there's a lot going on with that as well. And so that's a whole study in itself. That's a whole branch of study. So, and that's a path that I walk and that I study deeply, and I'm moving through it very slowly and learning a lot. I'm just exploring, the deepness of what is the Black origins of this path, and it's not so much spoken about in these modern churches that are mostly white. And so, it takes like a group like Deek House to keep this alive and to like keep talking about it and to not allow this path to be whitewashed as it has been. And if you listen to the hymns and you feel the vibration of the hymns, you'll feel ancestry, blackness, and vibing something that's very deep and very ancient, and something that's like simply unexplainable that you feel viscerally. And so, I mean, that's what I experienced for myself.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. If we could now switch gears and talk about the challenges that have been witnessed in what we might call the eldership or the foundational churches. There's been some news that's come out. I kind of give it to you to kind of share what's happened and how that's a challenging thing.
Yeah, I'll speak on that. In the IC flu branch of the Santo Daime, there's a reckoning happening, and a lot of things are coming to the surface. A lot of sexual allegations are coming to the surface. A lot of this stuff has been known for a really long time, but not by everybody in mass. Like everybody who's in the Santo Daime hasn't really known about this until now. It's really coming out. More people are starting to find out that, there's been some elders in Brazil, in the Brazilian Santo Daime, that have, been accused of some pretty horrendous things, some sexual assaults, misconduct, even pedophilia. Yeah, just a lot of disturbing things that have been going on. I'll name a few of those. This church in Brazil, Céu do Val, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. One of the elders, Walter Diaz Jr., currently being investigated for some pretty horrendous sex crimes allegedly with children. They're grown now, but now they're starting to like they've been speaking out and letting it be known what happened to them. And another church leader from Rio, who is the leader of the Church of Céu do Mar, Paulo Alberto. There's been a lot of people coming up, saying like, what he's been doing, or the sexual misconduct, and for many years now, actually. Yeah, I want to touch on this because it's definitely something that is, a problem not only in Santo Daime communities, but also in many different communities, ayahuasca communities, but also in the larger complex of cults, actually. So that's something that I definitely want to like bring to the attention of people, because like this is something that needs to be talked about. For too long, people have been like being quiet about this because it's systemic. There's a whole systemic structure. People not wanting to speak out, or like feeling embarrassed about it, or feeling like for whatever reason there hasn't been justice quick enough, in my opinion. Like I'm grateful that it's coming out now, However, when people go to leadership to let them know that these things are happening, they seem to be getting victim blamed, or like nothing gets done about it, and so then it allows the abuse to continue. So that needs to change. Like we need to like build and create a new culture that allows for this truth to be told, and allows for a change to happen, allows for accountability to be had, injustice to be had, and the people that are survivors of this conduct receive justice, and the people that are responsible for this type of behavior get held accountable. And so, it's a conversation that must be had, and continue to be had. So, like in our communities, so we can protect our communities from these predators, and what goes on behind closed doors, and even how people are abusing power and misusing their positions that they're in. I just feel like, no matter who you are, anybody could be called out and should be, if they're conducting themselves in this way. And we just need to rethink power structure, and rethink how power is utilized. It's like nothing happens until outside forces come in and start to do something about it. But as far as like people within, if somebody goes to a leader and tells them what's going on, a consequence should follow. Like, and I just don't understand why that hasn't been happening. But also what I want to say too is that the culture is subject to change as these things come to the light. We're experiencing the Me Too movement in the Santo Daime right now. Things are shaking. And so there is justice being had. There is truth coming to the surface. There is current court cases. People are being held accountable now, and hopefully we can, talk about this enough to actually change the culture to where, it doesn't get to the point where things are swept under the rug for years and decades. When people, go to leadership, then there can be something that happens right away to like prevent any further harm from happening. And so I would like to see us create a culture like that, as opposed to a culture that does all the same mechanisms that power does, that we always see power doing. It's like victim blaming, sweeping under the rug, protecting the inner circle, all that stuff needs to fall away, and it will fall away by us creating a new culture, that so people don't feel afraid to speak out about what happened to them. I'm also glad to see that this is coming to the surface, and more people are starting to learn about it.
This is very disheartening. It's upsetting. It's awful. It's awful to note the just the nature of this is heartbreaking and horrific. And I couldn't imagine children who are now adults, who were children nonetheless, experiencing this type of event. The combination of plant medicine with religion and being children, having no one to advocate for them. And as they're going to say something about it, people not doing anything about it. It's disgusting. It's infuriating because people do seldom believe that they can't challenge the church, that they can't, that they don't have a voice. And I'm happy that justice is happening now. Yeah, so many words. Still processing. Danielle, what's your take on what's happening with these churches?
I think that there are ways that it's potentially caused some rifts just across like the churches, like not just in the United States, but like in many places. There's, I think at the end of the day, though, like one of the pieces that people need to keep in mind in a lot of practices, there's a way that we want to put people on a pedestal. We want to like a certain way that we're venerating. And we need to remember that our leaders and our who are often like our teachers are also humans and not infallible. And so it's important not to hold somebody in such regard that you're not able to think critically about their actions, because no one is perfect. which is not to dismiss like what has happened, but it is to say like we need to have a different way of having an understanding of accountability. You can learn, and there could be teaching that you benefit from an individual, and there could still be problems. And if we're too deferential in a certain way, then we miss that, right? And we sort of, it sets a tone where there's then the ability maybe to have situations with abuse or people really mistreated. And then, the other thing to think about is like what it means to have systems of power, right? Like, how do we create, and I don't have an answer for this exactly, but how do we create systems where we can both have respect for the knowledge, the information that's shared, right? Without creating systems where like you're sort of concentrating power and then you can't question somebody or you can't communicate with them on that kind of more direct in that more direct way. I like I said, I don't have a clear like answer for that. I know that for my own practice, I am not looking at anybody like you are a saint, like a living saint or a living, I think we've had time and time again like examples across the world of like people who have been venerated like that and been taken down, right? Gandhi,
Mm.
Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, right? In his own ways, like we want to have this veneration of him, but he's still a human being, and you're not able to see someone else's humanity if you're not able to like really have that directness with them. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think no, it's sort of dissatisfying, but like no practice is perfect, right? We are all trying to achieve doing better, doing getting closer to that sort of ideal, but that's somewhat ephemeral. Like you'll never really get there. But we do need to look out for one another. We need to hold this, and we do need to hold people accountable when they cause harm, when we hurt, yeah, when we're using people or abusing them, certainly. I
Yeah.
know like I know some folks who are sort of pulling back for a variety of reasons because in part because of this or feelings related to that. And there are churches that are like less affiliated in a way right now. They're a little more independent. And I'm sure that that is contributing, at least in some churches, to the way that they're navigating things as well.
I feel you. It's challenging to contemplate because we work with these plant medicines. They become a part of us. These teachings become a part of us. They become a part of our fabric. The plants, they influence our life. The teachers, the wisdom that's passed down, it influences our life. And I think another angle when we think about the sexual allegations within plant medicine space in this regard is what does that mean for this practice and your relationship with it too? I think that there's that everything that's named, it's horrific when any organization, any type of lens or organization or framework irreparably damaging the lives of children and of people and taking advantage. It's also challenging to reconcile within your mind having any connection with that in the medicine work that you're doing. Even though no one, you may not be attending a church or a medicine circle where any of that's happening in that circle. I mean, in my own personal experience, I remember coming up and hearing stories, and I've had little tiny moments where I'm like, oh, that was weird, right? Like just little moments here and there, nothing like these children. But that informs so much. Like I was feeling the call to go to the jungle and train many years before I started, many like 7 years before I started actually going to the jungle to advance my relationship with this. And I didn't because I was terrified of the stories that I heard about women being essayed in the jungle. I was terrified of becoming one of those women. And I was like, and then I found some abuelas, some grandmothers to work with. And I was like, okay, like I found my way. But I waited. I waited until I knew that I was going to be in the hands of safety within the space because people can leverage, medicine and religion to have power over people. And in my taking the time in kind of bringing all this information together, it's it's done a lot to inform me about how to move and how to be in these spaces. What that's done for me as a leader and as the director of Black Condor is it's made me aware of how not to operate. It's made me very crystal clear and have a very strong vision of the protocols and the ways that we navigate and how I all I can do is keep and intend to what I can, while simultaneously though I'm very aware of what happens outside of the work that I'm doing, of the work that many of other organizations who are in their integrity are doing. Another thing I would name is that this really oftentimes taints our work. We are not those organizations. And so we're having to also combat that, those reputations and but name it, but just also to say not all medicine circles are built the same way. And we have to be very mindful about where, who we sit with, where we do our healing work with, making sure that there's clearly a defined way of principles and morality and integrity that a group is operating in, that's demonstrated and that's felt, because we are essentially entering into these spaces to heal and change our lives. What I would name is similar to what you named, is that, sometimes people can kind of have a pie in the sky idea about if spiritual people are coming together, working with sacred medicine, that they're somehow like really aligned. But what I will say is actually in the plant, like I said earlier, the plant medicine space is mirroring society, it's mirroring everything. It really is the people who decide what's happening. When I really sit with it, the plants are very high vibrational, they're this and that, but it really is the people who determine how all of this is going to go. So if you have people who are in aligned and who have values and who are operating from a place of being in their integrity, then that is the medicine space that you're going to get. That
Yeah.
is like the medicine isn't making you that way. The medicine can help bring out virtue, but the medicine can also help bring out shadow. And
Hmm.
that's something that we don't talk about. People really do think that medicine is going to make, like you were naming that earlier, like the medicine is like you have to do the work. We have to do the work to actually better ourselves. The medicine isn't going to automatically make you a better person. And
No, it's
that,
definitely not.
yeah.
And I think, like one of the things I think you could argue, although there's a certain level of irony here, but like in having gender separation in our churches, you could argue like, okay, there's a way that women are sort of supported and protected within each other a little bit because you're not really crossing a line. And there's a way that men can then support each other to do a certain kind of healing work, but there needs to be an openness and an honestness about that. So, if you have a church where somebody is sort of not approaching potential partners, for example, in a way, in a healthy way, right? Or doing things that maybe are sexually harassing, whatever. Like there needs to be a call to account. You need to have people do that. And so in the when it's working well in an ideal place, then that would be like if it's a man doing it, then your brothers are calling you out and helping you to like learn and adjust, and or vice versa, I think. There are people certainly who are born to this practice. That's part of how we got here, right? Um, but in so many ways, it's you're fighting against like many or resisting against generations of like a very different gendered understanding, very different way of engaging with the world. And you can still see that in other expressions, like what it means to be of service. Sometimes, there's a way that we need to hold each other accountable and to heal. and resist against like centuries of gendered roles and expectations and oppression to a certain extent, right? It's not to say that like different genders don't have certain sometimes more specified roles, particularly, but the way that we're in relation has very much changed. And you could argue uh being, the enslavement of like people and like the bringing of a certain kind of culture that was specifically designed to oppress others certainly contributes to that dynamic, but it isn't the only thing, and we have to learn and grow our way out of these systems that are harmful.
Thank you for sharing that, because one thing that we want to be mindful of doing and thinking about systems that are harmful is not creating more of those systems, within our healing spaces, like spaces that should be just for the healing of Black and Brown lives. We've gone through enough, and we deserve to like have spaces that don't. And it takes time. I definitely reflect on also generationally, like the fact that this is connected to elders and like what their lived experiences of what they went through, what they were journeying with versus I do think, and I'm grateful for, because I think it can be easy. And I don't think anyone here is standing in some sort of soapbox trying to condemn anything like that. But I would say I can keep it in perspective that being a millennial, being in this generation that I'm in, and being a millennial medicine woman, and kind of thinking about what that means for me as far as like the things I did not have to navigate to say that, to be who I am, and to operate the way I'm operating, to have this lens. It is exactly what I believe my ancestors and my grandmother and my aunt, like my great aunts, and my, all of that suffering and all of the things that they've navigated. I'm not carrying that. So there's almost like a bit of a clarity that I do, and a privilege in that. There's a privilege in the clarity that I get to walk around with, that I know that older systems didn't have. It's almost like we do have to hold ourselves to a better standard if we're going to say that we're standing on ancestors. We're standing on the shoulders of ancestors. You better be straight as a feather, because you didn't have to go through any of that stuff. You didn't have to go through nearly as much stuff. And so I do want to throw in that extra layer of the complexity of the generational traumas that we're not really holding or navigating, the atrocities that I just don't have the level of atrocity. I just know that I would never know. I'll never know the things that people went through, medicine women, medicine people, people who are creating these traditions, the levels of discrimination and harassment that then is in the body and is just there, maybe sitting just completely ignorant and not really accessible, even with medicine, because it's so deeply ingrained. So I think that's there.
I
Um,
think that's important to uplift. Like, you're probably assuming that you're from the United States, where your people were. You're likely like maybe the fifth generation since slavery, right? And in theory, like, what do they say? Like you're carrying 7 generations worth. So there's
yes,
still work clearly to be done, right? And yeah, it's not as direct. It is we do have to stand on the shoulders of the people who went before us, who persevered, and we have to balance that with the things that we have to persevere too. Right? How do we meet those things
you're like, girl, I got
um
taxes, I got
in the
bills.
best way possible? um because hopefully 5 generations from now, somebody will look back on you and say like, oh my gosh, adorable, she amazing things that she did. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Like, I have to keep that legacy in the same way. I think that, yeah.
We've had in this conversation, we've talked about this has been a very beautiful and rich conversation of going over the journeys that got you where you are and how this path has enriched your life. even given what you've shared, this path has been very enriching. People, we've opened up a full gamut of kind of showing the light and the shadow, which is important. And if someone were to then say want to enter into connecting with the Santo Daime or connecting with plant medicine work circles, what would you say? What would you name as like kind of good advice for someone who would be entering into wanting to connect with this for the first time?
Yeah, so what I would tell them is when you come in, just focus on your own healing at first. Like you will get instructed from the inside. You don't have to put yourself in proximity with any sort of power figure or do anything external in order to like be granted more of what you think that you want. Pay attention to your own process, do your own inner study within and really know why you're doing this and know why you came into this space. Don't get caught up in all the external plays because they're going to be there. The external plays are always playing. And the best thing for a person who is just coming in, or even people who've been in for a while and are just like moving through, is to know that the teacher is the medicine. The teacher is yourself within. Keeping that mindset will, I think, help you avoid a lot of things that you don't need to get into, basically. Because, there's light, there's dark, there's all the many facets of humanity and life, within these circles and within any circle and any group of people. It's just best to stay focused on your study and your healing and your path. Yeah, that's what I can say.
I think that's really that wise. I mean, one thing that I've been grateful that you've been doing is you've been hosting the Santo Daime song circles, so people can come and like just connect with the hymns and just connect with the music. We're doing this over Zoom. And then
Mhm.
I would say for folks, moments like that where say there's a way you can connect with the traditions, connect with the group, connect with material like this, the Black Condor Talks, connect with opportunities where you can see that group's work, go to any information calls, connect with people who've sat with that group, have an opportunity to really, actually ask a group, like, what measures do you put in place to create safety for your participants? We have that at Black Condor. We have very clear things that we do. We move with consent. We're a no touch environment. We don't touch participants, to support them through the ceremony process. So you're able to come, sit, do your work. If you need help, you obviously will help you. But we've taken the best practices of how to create safe spaces and implemented them. And so those are things you want to be looking for when you're wanting to sit with a group. Do they have best practices in place that's trauma informed and consent based and just really centered around there being safety? What vibes do you feel from the person holding the space? Like what type of vibe, like trust your intuition. Because also I would say this too tonight, I feel like, and it's interesting. I do feel like in the time where I was attracted, I also have to name it. It's also very spiritual. And the time that I was attracted to a certain group that wasn't moving in a good way, I can see now that that was a reflection of me in the time where I wasn't in my power. So I found a group that wants to overpower me, right? So these are things we have to also check in with. It's like if you're in a very highly vulnerable state, those are the times where I find you might find yourself in a really seedy plant medicine circle because there's almost like you're attracting the very thing that you're navigating. And so there almost has to be a shoring up of, wait a minute, okay, I'm in a very vulnerable spot. I'm going through a lot. Let me be mindful to not jump into a group in this vibration of me kind of needing something. Let me just take a moment to just sturdy myself and like really make sure I'm connecting with a plant medicine group that's holding the space. Because another thing I see is sometimes people I don't know if you've ever been in this position where it's like you're in such a challenging place in life, or maybe navigating spiritual crisis or navigating a dark night of the soul, that you're just kind of almost desperate to get to the medicine. And in a desperation, you're kind of, there's a willingness to compromise who you're going to be with because you just really, at this point, really need the support you need. I've seen that too.
Mhm.
And so there is something to be said about just really dialing that back in and making sure you're approaching a group within you being in your empowerment to meet that group in a good way. Because yeah, we bring ourselves with us wherever we go, basically, you know.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, and that those are a lot of good things to consider when, when you're thinking about if you're going to do this medicine or where you're going to do it at or who you're going to be with. All those are great things to consider. And so there's something that brought you to the point of wanting to make that decision. We have our guides with us, even before we even do the medicine, our guides are still here with us. And so, there's a place beyond time that we connect with all these things that guide us to the places that we're supposed to be. And just to be able to hear that voice and listen to that voice, which is you.
Yeah. I just want to note, like, this is such an interesting place to be because, like, we don't generally proselytize. Like, we're not like, you come to our thing, right? It's very much it as you feel called. If the medicine is calling you, then the path opens for you, I think. And that's certainly been in my experience, like how it works. Anytime where I've, like, for me personally, like, where it's been like, oh, somebody who like maybe this would be good for you, or they had like an interest but they were waffly, the door closes somehow, right? Like your car all of a sudden stops working, or you get a flat, or like a 24-hour bug right as you would need to leave to go to the ceremony or something. So like I kind of believe in that, like if it's a calling for you, you will find the path to have, and it will open. And that being said, I think with any practice, you need to go in and you sort of there's a way that you feel out people. So many churches, for example, in like the United States, have often they have like an interview process. And a little bit of that is like a protection because, as Tonai pointed out, it has been Santo Daime is like legal federally, but then it sort of has to get approval state by state, which is why Oregon was one of the first states because that's where this it first the first suit happened. So it got taken care of in that way. But in that process, it's a chance for them to know a little bit about you. Like any practice, you have to be careful if you're taking medicines or other things that may have an interaction. You want to be aware and you want to avoid, certain people need to avoid this type of ceremony. But it's also a chance for you to get to know them, to feel it a little bit, to just have an understanding of how the people will be. And I think, and I think we would say, like, you make a little prayer, right? Like, is this, please, like, make clear for me, is this the right way or not? That requires a certain amount of faith, right? But at the same time, this is a faith practice. And so that is one element. I will say, like, in certainly here, there are a lot more white folks that are going to be in, I think, almost any church, certainly the bigger ones. For me, when I was entering this, the first time you go, it's maybe a little bit intimidating or you're not as sure. And then very clearly the medicine like tells you what you need or gives you what you need. And then the practice becomes much more like, I'm doing this for myself. So I'm not focused on the people next to me in this way. I'm not worried about what I look like or these other pieces that might happen because I'm here for myself. That doesn't, in full honesty, this doesn't work for everybody necessarily. I think one of the things that I think is really beautiful about Black Condor is the specificity of building a Black space, right? There's a different kind of safety, a different way that you can open and be vulnerable, particularly in that kind of space that you might not, it might be harder to get, at least at first, maybe in these other areas. And that's okay. Like it's not going to be a calling for everybody, right? But if you do have an interest, I think at this point there are churches that have websites that are like much more open and like they're very clear about their process. Yeah, so it's doing that kind of piece, and seeing if it fits or if it's right. It might not be for everybody. I think I heard this story of this woman who said, "Oh, I had this terrible time." And but when you dug into it a little bit, it was more like the medicine was like, you got to stop partying, you got to stop drinking, you got to stop doing these other things. And she wasn't quite ready to let go of those things in her life, so it became more of a challenge after. So being aware, like, if you're in a period of your life where you're like, maybe I need a change, but I'm not quite ready to start making the change, it might not be the right time to come to something like this. You need to kind of get yourself prepared, in certain ways. It's not the same as like an ayahuasca ceremony where I think depending on who you're with, sometimes there's like requirements about like your diet, for example, or like both like what you might be eating, but also like what you might consume, entertainment or other things like that. There aren't the same parameters for us, particularly, although many people do kind of out of practice make a certain diet that can sometimes, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar. There are things that people give up because they feel told to by medicine or they have a better experience. Some things can maybe make your tummy feel funky and you notice it, like if you're doing, if you're like I noticed that like I sometimes I was eating pineapple for breakfast before I would go to work, or like in the afternoon or something, and it was like, no, that doesn't really work for me, so I stopped doing that, for example. Let the medicine call you. I think that's probably true for most of these medicines, that you need to be called, and otherwise it maybe is a more challenging experience.
Well, I just want to say thank you both for your time and your energy today. This has been a very illuminating conversation, and I think we need to have more conversations like this. Would love to hear just any last little things you'd like to name before we hop off tonight. Any last words you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to say I really appreciate you for calling me here to do this interview and this conversation with you and Danielle. And I think that we all touched on some really important things here. I'm really excited about the rest of the community receiving what we've talked about. Black Condor is amazing. I really recommend the space of Black Condor if anybody's interested in plant medicine, for sure. With my 20 plus years of working with this medicine, the Black Condor space feels really safe and really amazing for me to do work with you all. So really appreciative, and I have so much gratitude. And I hope to continue to serve in the way that I can for this community, and for my Black community who work with the medicine. And yeah, much love to you all.
Ashe.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Tonai said. Like, thank you so much. I think, like I said before, there's more than one way up the mountain. Like, we need all of the opportunities for healing, for folks available. And I think it's often like it's not just your personal healing, it's like a generational healing. So encourage people to yes, join Black Condor, and work together to get us free.
Ashe, Ashe. And thank you both. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for joining us. If you have been seeking to learn more about plant medicine, please feel free to subscribe here and connect with us. Visit our website. And until next time, peace and blessings to you.